So I believe we've covered this topic before, but we're going to touch base with it again. So it's a controversial topic. It is vetting horses at a horse sale. We know people who are extremely passionate about this topic, and they're not wrong. So there is no, vetting is subjective at a horse sale. And the question is, what's your end goal? What do you want to do with the horse? What are you trying to accomplish with that horse? But there are so many horses that quote unquote fail people's vets that go on to be graded stakes horses, grade 1 winners, exceptional race horses. So we kind of wanted to touch base on vetting because a lot of times numbers and figures get into people's minds and it scares them off certain horses when it's actually nothing to be concerned about. So I think the hottest topic probably is scoping and grading of scoping. So I brought a veterinarian with me. Those of you who do not know, my wife is actually a vet. She was a racetrack vet when I used to train, so she's highly qualified to be speaking about veterinary medicine, and I am not. So I will let her talk about scoping horses. So grades, let me prompt this. So grades with scoping horses, right? What are some of the things that we see at sales that sometimes scare people in terms of grades of horses?
Okay, so when a vet is actually scoping a horse in this country, we grade the throat, grade 1, 2A, 2B, 3, and so on. What you'll see in a lot of sales books, the radiographic report, they will grade scopes as A+, A-. This is a subjective, and I repeat, subjective overview of the overall throat. That includes arytenoids, epiglottis, etc. The actual grading system in veterinary medicine for the arytenoids is a grade 1, 2A, 2B, etc. When I go to a sale, I would like to see either a grade 1 throat or a 2A throat. To me, anything beyond that, I don't really want to mess with. It's not saying that a 2B can't run, but you run into more problems potentially. But grade 1, 2A are perfectly fine.
So this is one thing, and you know, sometimes people get nervous about 2As because people think 2As can become 2Bs, and they can. Sometimes throats get worse, sometimes throats get better, right? When it's dealing with throats and racehorses, it's a crystal ball. There's a horse that we have for a client who, now that he's 5, might be 5, he's gone to a 2B and he needed a tie-back surgery to kind of help him in terms of his airway. But a lot of times at a sale, most horses are a 2A. You know, the 1s are, and 1As, are very rare to find. There's quite a few at the sales, but 2A is your norm. So sometimes people, when they hear a 2, they're like, well, it's not a 1. It's not that big a deal. 2As are perfectly functional in terms of when it comes to racing. And this is one thing that you need to remember when you're dealing with racehorses. In my experience, horses that tend to get worse with their airways are bigger, heavier colts. There's something about when the testosterone hits them and they get really thick and they get thick jowls, that airway is going to go the wrong way, but it doesn't always. There's sometimes you'll buy a 2A yearling and the horse stays a 2A his entire career. So when you're dealing with fillies, when you're dealing with lighter framed colts, to me, I'm never concerned with the 2A. It's the horse is mainly going to be fine anyways.
So going along with that, the reason most likely why, if you have a big, heavy colt, is the way that the anatomy of that laryngeal nerve goes. Along the left side, it has a very long way to travel, and adding excess weight and muscle can cause problems to that nerve, which is why I would agree if you have a big, heavy colt, there is the potential that that throat could worsen over time. But to me, when I'm scoping these yearlings, is 2 things. One, this is a standing scope. This is not a scope, a dynamic scope where they're moving, where they're, jogging, anything like that. You're just seeing the throat at rest. So it's just a very small picture. The other thing is these are babies. Their throats are going to mature. They're going to strengthen. So we have seen horses before where we have seen 2B throats at a sale, and I have had a consignor say to me, this isn't the horse for you, it's a 2B. And then a year later, she flagged me down and apologized that the horse pinhooked, sold for over 200,000 and the throat was a 2A because it strengthened. So again, this is just like a one moment in time. Throats can change. You're just doing the best you can with the information that you have.
And so Dominique made a point there. And what's interesting is, I've mentioned this, we look at it pretty much every horse in a yearling sale. Now, when it gets in the later books of Keeneland, we do ask consigners, hey, can you put horses that radiograph well and have, above a 2A or above throat. So sometimes there will be consigners in that case, they were trying to help us and they didn't put that horse on our list because we specifically asked them for criteria to try and make it easier. If you have not been to Keeneland, as you get to book 5, it is exhausting and the number of horses increases and the amount of time you have to look at each horse shortens. So you're trying to sift through as much as you can without missing things that could potentially be good horses for your clients. So that's kind of what happened in that scenario. But most sales, we have eyes on pretty much every horse in a sale, except in the later books of Keeneland. So something else that can sometimes pop up in terms of horses are vetting of radiographs, and sometimes it's not too much of a concern depending on where it is. Sometimes it is, and it's a big thing to understand what is. We actually picked up an exceptional filly for a client because the radiograph report looked pretty scary to most people, but to us and to our vet, it was a non-issue. But because there was a lot of writing on it, it scared the hell out of most people. So one of those things that scares people is sesamoiditis and having issues with sesamoids. So I'll let Dominique touch on that a little bit.
So sesamoiditis, it's just a vague term basically evaluating the vascular channels in the sesamoids. It's very common. Mild sesamoiditis is very common in yearlings, and some of the contributing factors can be, these babies go through a fast growth phase, they gain a lot of weight in a short period of time, puts a little bit of strain on the suspensory, which then just creates a little bit of increased vascular channels in the sesamoids. We used to see, in my opinion, worse sesamoiditis back in the day, as a lot of people were heavily prepping, but now I think the consigners do such a good job in balancing the horse's needs, growth, and exercise that we're just seeing a lot less of it. To me, mild sesamoiditis, not at all a big deal. When it's more moderate, you have to consider maybe giving that horse some time off, 60 days or more. Definitely scanning the suspensory branches, making sure that those look okay. But to me, mild sesamoiditis, it's a no-brainer. If you like the horse, just go for it.
Well, and a lot of times it's, Dominique mentioned this, right? So for those of you who might not be intimately involved in the horse business, most of these horses are raised in Kentucky. So in Kentucky, obviously, the winter is very cold. You got a lot of snow. The grass is pretty much dormant. And then you get this massive, massive spring up to where these horses who've been growing at steady growth phases because they've been eating steadily, now all of a sudden the grass is green, the horses are outside, they're eating, and they hit massive growth spurts. So we've seen it a lot with our foals that we've been selling now as yearlings, where horse vet's clean, all of a sudden spring hits, and all of a sudden we've got some sesamoiditis on a horse that had no issues before. And a lot of that is attributed, as Dominique said, with these horses having big growth spurts at the same time as they're preparing for sales. So their bodies are trying to pack in all the nutrients that they're trying to absorb while also trying to get ready for sales and doing sales prep while also trying to use that nutrition for growth. So it just kind of adds up. When you're training something that has more and more weight being added on, it's things that we would find in racing as trainers of horses going through growth spurts have more things that pop up and you just back off on them a little bit. So as Dominique said, kudos to most of these people who prep these horses on understanding how to balance that so the horse is growing and yet they still look great at the sales.